Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Happiness Index podcast. My name is Stefan Tornquist, and I'm the writer of the Global Workplace Happiness Report. I'm borrowing Matt Phelan's chair to speak with the academics and the experts who are contributing to this project. I'm in Brooklyn, New York. It is mid-January, and it is well below 0 Celsius, but Celsius completely confounds me. It's just very cold. Um, and I'm very excited today to have Dr. Sarah Pass with us. Sarah is contributing her Friday evening. We're inching into her Friday evening, so thank you for that. She's contributed an essay around meaning and purpose to the report that really touches on a great many interesting things. I started with a list of 25 questions. We will not get to all of those. We'll try to pare those down, but that's how fruitful this essay is. Sarah is a senior lecturer in human resource management and employee engagement at the University of Nottingham and an advisory board member of Engage for Success. So thank you for joining us, Sarah. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work? And I know the University of Nottingham. I don't know Engage for Success. So if you could tell us a bit about that as well.
Yeah, hi, and thank you for having me. And I'm based over in Nottingham, so the UK at the moment. So not maybe as cold as it is over in New York, but it certainly feels that way. And certainly a lot more maybe grey and damp. But yes. I work at Nottingham Business School, which is part of Nottingham Trent University, and I also spend my time working alongside in collaboration with a movement called Engage for Success. Engage Success started in 2011 as a result of a report to government by David McLeod and Nita Clark around employee engagement, mainly looking at what is it, how do you do it, and for organisations that are doing it well, what is it that they're doing? Like I say, that report sparked the movement. It's a voluntary movement, so we try to uncover different aspects to it. For example, meaning, purpose, the role of line managers, what makes a difference. We do that through research projects, events, activities. So that's where I suppose that link with the university comes. I've spent the past 25, 30 years now looking at employee experiences of work, very much from that employee perspective, I suppose. What drives me in that feeling of, I know what that horrible feeling on a Sunday evening feels like to not that work, that idea that work is coming tomorrow morning. And even actually where it starts to filter in from as soon as the weekend starts, that it's coming. And we spend so much of our time in work. And for many, it's not a positive experience. I think that's where my research has stemmed from a lot, and that's where the work with Engage for Success has come from. We get to do research projects together.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a perfect jumping off point. So your essay is about meaning and purpose. Companies talk about purpose quite a lot. What do they think they mean, and are they correct?
Depends on the organisation. I think what we tend to see, and I know we've talked and debated about it before, is that sort of authenticity around purpose. So when we talk about purpose, it's like, well, why are we here? And you see it a lot more in sort of startups, where people have come together because they've just got a really good idea, something that drives them, something that they want to do or make or change or add to. And it kind of starts from there. But as organisations get bigger, that sense of purpose, I don't know whether it kind of dilutes, filters out. Sometimes it becomes a bit of a sort of a tick box. So it massively varies. But I think sometimes organisations forget to make it authentic. And then it becomes just a buzzword. And for many, I think that's where it's kind of often fallen into.
Can it work at an enterprise level? I mean, have you seen companies that are, they've got a Byzantine organizational structure, multiple industries, and, sort of just there's a brand on top, but each one of those cantons are sort of their own. Can there be one purpose, or does it then need to be sort of more localized?
Definitely. And I mean, the obvious ones are things in social care, health, where you can sort of see that overarching purpose, something that drives us. I say I'm based in the UK. We have the NHS, the National Health Service. I've done a lot of work with the NHS over the years, and ultimately when you speak to people who are working there, they know why they're working there. They know why they're there. I do a lot of work with civil service, Ministry of Defence. Again, they understand ultimately that overarching purpose is why they're there. Private sector, same thing again. You can get organisations that are clear about their purpose. Not only do their customers know what they stand for, but actually the employees do as well. And it's probably the reason why those employees have gone to actually apply for the job. And it's definitely one of the reasons why they're staying. So it can be done at that sort of macro level. But I think, and you mentioned about it on that more localized level, it needs to be embedded throughout to make sure that it actually means something more than just a strapline on the wall, often printed in somewhere that people just walk past and don't even pay attention to.
Yeah. You make a distinction between meaning and meaningful work in the essay. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, so we often talk about meaning and meaningful work, and we often kind of just use the words interchangeably. From a more academic perspective, there's often sort of a definition between the two. So meaning we kind of look at as, it's what my work signifies to me. It's the job or the role that I want. It's that, what does it mean to my life? And that can be from, my job has meaning because it enables me to pay the bills and support my family. It could be something as simple as that. It could be meaning in that this job helps me look after somebody. It's health. It helps contribute to society and community. It could be, it's about our individual perspectives on those things, whereas meaningful is more about those sort of moments. So meaningful isn't something that happens all the time. It's about those sort of episodic times where something has happened and just made what I've done today feel meaningful. It kind of drives us a bit more. So academically, we kind of talk about it in two different types of ways. But I think when we talk about meaning and meaningful in general, we do tend to interchange them a bit.
So if it's episodic, what's the creating meaning for an employee is probably a vague proposition to some businesses. They might say, well, we have 360-degree reviews once a year or every 6 months. That's, that should be meaningful to an employee. Or maybe they've got, some perks or something that are in that. How can you make it sort of, is it at the line manager level where someone ought to be thinking about, like, does this job mean something to this team? What are the meaningful moments for them?
Yeah, so if we're talking about meaning and those meaningful moments, like I said, those meaningful moments I often see as being a bit more individual,
Right.
whereas meaning would be that sort of bigger picture. So having it from the senior level, who can actually give that clear narrative, that clear story as to what the organization's about, its purpose, what it is that you're doing is meaning, so that those moments then become meaningful. I mean, we always hear tales about, isn't it, the cleaner at NASA? When he was asked about what was he doing, his purpose, his sense of meaning in his job is, I'm cleaning to enable man to get on the moon. Whereas somebody noticing the cleaner, thanking the cleaner, making those points would be more meaningful. So it's more individualized, I think. So how do we do it? Good question. It's a combination of all those types of things, I feel. So it's about sometimes the small things, the small recognition. You mentioned about appraisals, and so often, and I'm trying not to be too cynical of them, they're often a tick box. They're often a process. People complete them and it doesn't really mean anything. So how are they going to be meaningful? But it's about how it's actually done. Whereas that line manager that sits down with their employee and goes, okay, right, let's look at your appraisal. Let's look at the objectives of the organization and look at what you're trying to achieve so that we can connect those things between the organization and your own personal values and perspectives. And to also, in that appraisal, where the line manager then makes comments about, oh, well, I've spoken to X, Y, or Z who've passed on this about the work that you've been doing, and thank you for this, and I've appreciated that. You come away from it feeling positive. It becomes a meaningful moment that you've then had, a sense of connection, a sense of relationship. But it's not necessarily something that's going to be happening consistently throughout the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or even, yeah. So if you ask a psychologist, what are the core human needs that meaningful work can satisfy that it wouldn't otherwise?
What are the core meaningful needs of work? It's that, I suppose, a sense of autonomy, that sense of connection, that sense of contributing to something, sense of direction as well. What is it that we're doing? Why am I getting up on a morning and going to do that job? We often talk about this sense of, again, some people are like, oh, meaningful purpose. It's just, they're the sort of the buzzwords. They're the new thing. And I think there's always been a need for that. There's always been conversations around it, but maybe those conversations have really picked up, especially because of the pandemic. That kind of people, why am I getting up and doing this? People have started to question that a lot more. And I think, I'm not saying it's necessarily always a generational thing, but certainly we're getting different groups of people going, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I spending my time contributing to something if I don't know what it's contributing to? So it's knowing that you're connecting in that particular way. But like I say, it gives us that sense of direction, that sense of focus, that sense of moving forward. And yeah, certainly for me, that's, I suppose, sense of contribution.
Mm-hmm.
And relationships.
The generational question's an interesting one, because I think certainly here there's a fairly strong stereotype around the disengagement of, let's say, 27 and younger, something to 18 to 27. And I was just looking at some research that suggested that it wasn't that this age cohort was less committed to their work or less interested in the role that work played, but that perhaps their definition has a greater component of like, but I want to, it is important to me, or at least it should be important to me, but here are the things it needs to be important to me. And perhaps, although this research didn't go into this level of detail, it might be that that they're looking for a greater sense of meaning in that work. And then I suppose the trick is, finding your way to, well, we're not putting people on the moon. So how do we, with a less obvious end point, how do we build that meaning into our work? Because of course we are, clothing people or treating people, or treating people is pretty straightforward, but you know what I mean. So I guess that's is meaning something that organizations can design for beyond well, we figured out a good purpose that's actually genuine. What then?
Yeah, I think it's that kind of sense of connection to it and coming down to the individual level, which I think a lot of organizations are struggling with.
Yeah.
That kind of, it's easy to treat everybody in a big blanket rather than, individual and personalization and things like that. I mean, you mentioned about obviously different generations and this idea that the younger generations are more disengaged. And like I said, I think it's just they're maybe engaged in a different type of way, or they're looking for something in a different type of way. And certainly the research that we've done, we can see there's different stages of engagement, and sometimes that's to do with other things going on in your life, other kind of connections and purposes. Obviously before the big financial crash, people would be, I'd go to work. I knew, I needed to work really hard. I got paid really well. I was able to get the lifestyle, buy the house, do all those things, support my children. So they gave up a lot of maybe other aspects of their life to provide those things. And then so people of a younger generation are seeing or saw their parents be made redundant or the financial situations they were in, and thinking, but they've given so much of their life to work and they're not, what have they got back for it? So they've started to question some of the things that used to always be the norm and the natural. And again, I suppose it's that connecting of, well, if I'm working in an organisation these days, and I see it from, I'm a lecturer, I teach MBA students, master's students, they're coming away and they're looking for that next post, that next job, and a lot of that is looking for something that they feel they can connect with, that they feel they can contribute towards, that they feel that they'd kind of be noticed at as well. So that sense of progression, development, and I think the development things are actually a bigger hook than most organisations maybe look at. It's more than just pay. People come to work for more than just pay. Fundamentally, people come to work for pay. But actually, if you've really got it right, it's more than that. And it's about developing from those social interactions. So we've seen again from the data and everything else that organisations that are providing social interactions for their employees are showing high levels of connection and engagement, that sense of development, progression, all those different things, looking at all those different levels to see, well, what is it that person's wanting, and how can we connect with that? And that, for me, often comes down to those relationships. So if you have a good relationship with your line manager, they will therefore know you and be able to look at and help progress you and help develop you and help you make your work have meaning and give you those meaningful moments. So an awful lot of it, to me, comes down to managers, and certainly to your line manager.
Well, certainly relationship makes such a difference. I mean, isn't there, I can't remember the study, but wasn't the number one predictor of, I think it was happiness at work, but maybe I'm using the wrong term, is having a friend.
Yeah.
Someone mentioned it on a podcast the other day, but like, do you have a good friend at work was, a more powerful indicator. Maybe it was just a retention. I don't know.
No, yeah,
And then,
definitely. Yeah, that connection. I think it's we we seek those out, those connections as human beings. We want to contribute to something, but we want to have connection. And for many, you get that through work. It's so as you get older, it gets harder to make friends. You haven't got a playground to play a ball in, and so we get a lot of those connections through work, and having that person to go to speak to. I mean, I remember, this is many years ago now, but one of the studies I did was in a manufacturing organisation, and the people there working on a factory floor, and they'd been there 20 plus years. It gives you the sense that there's a strong commitment to the organisation. Turnover was low, absenteeism rates were low, but actually, when you talk to the employees about why they're there, they were there because they did have a sense of connection to the organisation. They found the organisation, what they were producing, had a positive brand. They liked that. But ultimately, it was about the friends that they'd made whilst they were there. They started working there, never with the intention of staying, but they'd made relationships, they'd made connections. I remember one saying to me, yeah, sometimes he feels like pulling a sickie, but he preferred to come in and rib his mate about the fact that their football team lost last night. Or another one saying, yeah, but if I'm not there, then such and such friend is going to get my work to do as well. And
yeah.
so they kind of make that extra effort to make that connection. And actually, I come into the office, certainly now of hybrid working, I've come into the office because I know that person that I like, that friend at work is there. Mm-hmm. We get to have a bit of a natter, and get a bit of a connection, which is harder to do outside of those things. So yeah, I think it's a big part.
I'm reminded, I used to work in restaurants a million years ago, and that was in the days of, it was a French restaurant was my first job, and the kitchen was closed off, of course, at the time and it was a wild jungle in that kitchen, loud, profane, but incredibly fun. And the people were, very close. And I talked to a head chef who'd been around since those days, who's now, because at least here in the States, the open plan where you can see the kitchen, people almost sit around, it's almost
Yeah.
an entertainment. And these two fellows were talking about how much harder it is to keep people, that now it's seen much more as like, well, this is my job. I'm now this kind of chef. I want to be with this next, I want to get to
Yeah.
the next level. And, which is perfectly fine. But you kind of suspect, oh, as soon as you were put in front of the house, because you can't be profane and crazy in that public setting, you're under the microscope. There are French restaurants where people are wearing gloves, which is just anathema. Um, but you could imagine that sense of connection between the team is very
Yeah.
different than it would have been in those days. Anyway, um, uh, we haven't really talked about the research around the impact of meaning on performance. And this is my cynical business consultant take. What does it mean? I mean, certainly retention. We can all, if somebody's got that friend, that well-being. But what does it mean for some of the other ways in which a company wants to succeed?
Yeah, I think if you have a connection to what you're doing, you know why it is that you're doing it, and what it is you're trying to achieve, both as a team, a department, and as an organization, you give that a bit more. You invest in it a bit more. So things like innovation, trying to help the organization improve, to progress, to develop, to grow. Obviously you mentioned retention. It's things like absence rates as well. Actually being there when you're supposed to be there, but
Mhm.
being there and actually being there. There's that kind of sense of you're in the job and you're ticking the boxes. They're sort of plodding along, but that's not actually really contributing or making a major difference. And it's going that extra mile, which I think you there is a balance there with burnout, but it's definitely that kind of sense of commitment, sense of loyalty, wanting to perform. If you're connected and you have a sense of purpose and connection to your organization, you're also more likely to promote it. We're seeing more and more people who are being encouraged by their organization to promote the work that they're doing on social media platforms. LinkedIn, for a classic example. What is it that you're doing? Recommending your products. You're not going to do that if you don't really have that sense of connection or purpose to them, that sense of wanting the organization to do well. So I think it kind of all stems from those things, which how do you measure them and everything else is a whole different kind of conversation.
Sure.
But it's that kind of yeah, you can definitely see there's some clear connections between, and we can see it in statistics and surveys. Employees who say that they find purpose in their job, they find that their work meaningful, they have that sense of connection. They say that they perform better. They say that their organisation performs better. We can see better customer services. They're likely to go that extra mile to help out that customer, who will then come back again and tell others as well. So there are actually benefits to the organisation in doing this. It's not just nice to have. It actually really makes a difference to the bottom line.
Yeah, I wonder if there's evidence around, companies go through up and down cycles. And, you might be doing great in one quarter, but whatever happens. And in those moments of friction in the market, or perhaps just the need to change, to adapt to the market, whether their resilience is in some ways a corollary of the meaning that people find. Because if, psychological safety, it should always be the foundation of a relationship with a company. But at certain points, the company can't say, "Oh, hey, you're going to have a job here forever," right?
Yeah.
That, people see what's happening, and I wonder whether meaning is the bridge to the future. Like I believe in what we're doing. I like the people I'm doing it with. I'm here to try to get us, to be a part of what gets us to the other side.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this whole sense of meaning and purpose and connection. You mentioned earlier on about Engage for Success, the movement I do a lot of work with. One of their sort of 4 enablers of engagement looks at strategic narrative, that sort of sense of connection, the story, knowing where you're going. And a lot of the work that we've done has looked at national data around engagement. And we could see that, for example, during the pandemic, as you'd expect, engagement levels dramatically dropped. There was a lot going on. But we can also see that the level of drop differed depending on the type of organisation. So organisations that had employees who were ticking all the boxes in terms of feeling that their work was meaningful, that they had connection, a sense of purpose, that they were engaged, had a much lower level of a drop, and they rebounded much quicker. So as we came out of the pandemic, those kind of levels were coming back to almost pre-pandemic. Whereas for organisations that wasn't a core driver, that wasn't a key focus, employees there were really treated, or certainly gave the impression of being treated like resources. Engagement levels were low. What they offered was at a bare minimum. Those drops were dramatic. So like I say, those that were doing it well, 1 or 2% drops. Those that weren't doing it, you're talking up to 13, 14% drops, and still a long way off in terms of that rebound coming out. We can also see as well that in terms of unmanageable job stress and times when, there's always going to be times when work's stressful. There's always going to be those deadlines, or systems don't work, or there's some problem. You mentioned the kitchen. There's a problem in the kitchen. There's stressful moments. Well, for those that feel they know why they're there, they know what the work is, what it's contributing to. It helps ride through those times. And it stops them from thinking, right, I'm going to jump ship and go somewhere else. I'm not even going to bother turning up. They help the organisation get through it, and also actively try to help things rebound, get back to those kind of levels. So I think it definitely makes a difference. Because I say, there is always those peaks and troughs, but it's that trying to maintain that future perspective.
All right, one thing I noticed that I want to hit on, because it's certainly something I've seen. You mentioned that micromanagement has a specifically corrosive effect on meaning, if I read it correctly, even if intentions are good. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So having meaning and meaningful work, finding purpose, there's a lot of connection between that and having a sense of autonomy. Having that sense of being able to take some element of control, feeling like you're trusted to get on with the work. All those are positive feelings. Whereas when you're being micromanaged, it kind of starts to erode that feeling of trust, that feeling of, it takes away our sense of, I suppose, control, our sense of connection, our contribution.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it creates negative feelings like, why am I being micromanaged? Don't you think I can get on with my job? Don't you trust me? To the point that you start to go, well, why bother? I will do as I'm told. Oh, and then you might see something that you think will help. Oh, I wasn't told to do that, so I'm just not going to do it. So you start to disconnect, you start to disengage. The sense of meaning that you're getting from the job starts to erode. And you're certainly, meaningful moments, having those meaningful work are generally positive feelings. And I don't know many people who could say that they're micromanaged and say they're having positive feelings. They're not. Well, I suppose the only way you could get that is if you're being told exactly why you're being micromanaged, and you can see that there's a purpose to being micromanaged. But for most of the time, it kind of chips away at you, and has a sort of a negative effect.
Well, and it's sort of it asks you not to develop your critical thinking, but to subsume it.
Yeah.
And
You feel like you become a machine. You kind of stop. I suppose the way to manage it, we often disconnect our emotions from it because it can get us down, and we become sort of machine-like and mechanical. So you're not finding those kind of connections. If you're being micromanaged, you're probably not feeling that you're contributing. But again, that sense of connection starts to get eroded.
yeah, I mean we know that relationships play this enormous role in meaningful work. And I mean, it's not something that organizations measure, so
Yeah.
therefore they probably underestimate its importance. I just wonder how many mergers and acquisitions have failed, not because the technologies weren't a good fit, but because so many relationships were, torn apart in the course
Yeah.
of that restructuring. I mean, I doubt there's proof either way out there in the literature, but
Yeah, it connects to change management, how you've managed that change and managed those relationships, because those relationships can get damaged quite quickly and easily when there's a breakdown in communication, lack of understanding around some of those things. And, it's those relationships, like I say, with as we merge, as we grow, those relationships can change even from the person that you sat next to,
yeah.
mucked about with every day, suddenly they become your boss. That's a different type of relationship all of a sudden. But yeah, certainly in terms of sort of mergers, I suppose it goes down to culture, doesn't it? Can you have those conversations? Can you make those connections? Could you connect and understand it from each other's perspective? There's a study I saw the other day, and it was talking about there's been a slight increase in the number of um, people doing joint chief exec roles. So doing it in combination with somebody else, um, and they were sort of speculating as to why that might be. And what were the things that made it more successful than not? Because some worked really well and some actually didn't. And I think it comes down to that sense of relationship. You're coming, if you're doing the role as a joint chief execs, you've got to be able to have a conversation, and a difficult conversation often a lot of the time if you're
Yeah.
thinking of things in different kinds of ways. So how do you come out with the one answer when there's two people making those decisions? So if those relationships aren't there to be able to have those awkward conversations, to work it through, and then that filters down to the rest of the organization, when you're trying to pull together different particular groups. And I think, yeah, those relationships when, yeah, you mentioned psychological safety earlier on. We've talked about job security, all those fears come into it. And when you start to worry about, do you feel that you're in a safe position? Are you still going to have that job if you were to merge? And I think that starts to impact as well, on those kind of meaningful moments, those kind of connections. And certainly if you've got a new job, new boss, you've almost got to try to re-establish all those connections as well, which can be difficult, especially in the way that we're working. There's new ways of working, different ways of working, connecting online, whilst fantastic to enable us to connect. And like I say, you're in New York, I'm in the UK, have this conversation on a Friday evening, or for you, it's probably more of a Friday afternoon. But at the same time, it's different from necessarily being in the room together, and having that kind of conversations before and after. So all those things become much harder to manage, and to connect, and to develop.
All right, let's end our formal questions along the lines of what can people do about it? Like where do you start if you're not? I mean, for listeners who are in HR, I'm sure they've got sort of an idea and even programs in place. But if you're more sort of a generalist business leader and you're like, yeah, I think we could we could have a greater sense of collective meaning. Where do you start?
Yeah, I think it's at those kind of, well, why are we here? What is it we're doing, and why is it that we're doing this, and why is it that you're doing this? And so having that sense of um, focus, about the storytelling, the where has the organisation come from and where is it planning to go. So you need to have that as a building block. Like I say, Engage for Success refer to it as the strategic narrative. What is it that I'm doing, and what is it that I'm contributing to? Those kind of things then get connected with your managers, your line managers, enabling them to have those relationships to enable employee voice. What you don't want is having those kind of moments, those kind of stories, or that sense of purpose where you're just telling people it,
Right.
or that it has no meaning to it. You've got to make it authentic, which can be challenging because it for a lot of managers and business owners, chief execs, maybe they didn't get into that management role because they wanted to be a manager. And we debate this a lot in the UK, and I know it's slightly different in the US, that being a manager can be a job, a thing. Whereas in the UK, we have a lot of what we call accidental managers, people who want to progress to that next level, but the only way to do that is to become a manager. So they progress in their career, but then they've had to take on management responsibilities. So they might not have those soft skills, those connection skills to connect to people, which I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it's about finding those kinds of ways to get the stories out there. The brand, for example, what does the brand look like? What does it stand for? Do you work for an organization? People can go, yeah, I'm happy to work there. I'm happy to share that that's what I'm doing. Having those sort of sense of connection, and make those sort of meaningful moments, those relationships. And they can be from something really, really small. I always remember a case study, and again, this is reading from a textbook, so it's not my first-hand knowledge, but Campbell Soup. I'm sure I remember there was a story in there about the chief exec who was writing little personalised notes to people, and then people actually keeping them on their desk. And I've been places where they've had those little notes, but they've been printed off, and it's quite, or you can tell, like, certainly these days it's been written by AI. Right. It's not. Yeah, so
ChatGPT thinks I've been doing a great job.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, again, AI is fantastic for making you feel good. Its whole job is to be positive. So, but yeah, it's about those little things, I suppose, what I'm trying to say. Those little things that snowball. It's not something you can just, it's Friday now, Monday morning, right, I'm going to do this and it's going to change. It's not going to happen like that, because it's not going to be authentic. It's going to be about making those connections, making those relationships. And I suppose I'm biased in my research. My focus has always been on the employee. So if you want to start looking at your purpose, you want to start looking at making work meaningful, and have a sense of meaning, talk to your employees. Actually have those conversations. Do you spend all your time just sat in your office all the time? Do you connect with them? Do you have those conversations? Do you know who they are? So I remember the example I gave you of the manufacturing organisation. One of the things I remember them saying as well is that they were much more connected to certain departments than others. And when you talked about why, they're like, well, my manager, when he bumps into me on the corridor, acknowledges my presence, knows who I am, and asks after the family. And it just seems small, but actually, if you think about those meaningful moments that we all have, often they are those connections and those sense of connection. So as a first step, start there, and then start looking at creating that sense of focus, that sense of strategic narrative, to start to get people on board with where the organization's going and what it's about.
Okay, so that's a very human answer. What about machines? Like, is there a role? You were talking about how meaningful moments can be quite bespoke to the individual. Somebody in Silicon Valley would immediately say, "Well, then I can build an AI to help do that." Leaving aside whether that is true or not, actually, let's engage with that. What do you think about the role of not just AI necessarily, but of technology in trying to, enhance or protect meaning? Well, there's meaning and then meaningful work, right? And maybe it does have an implication for one, but not for the other.
Yeah, again, I think when we talk about technology, we talk about AI, we, a bit like when we talk about meaning and meaningful, we give it this blanket, this big, when actually we're not looking at the individual bits of it. So there are aspects of AI and technology that can actually, yes, very much be of benefit and help, but also there's a whole different side of it that maybe not. I mean, you're seeing increasingly, certainly we're seeing more and more in the news of people using AI to be a friend, to be that person to talk to. And there's been incidences of late where that's had a negative outcome, where that friend has supported them to do some negative things, and to go down a path that maybe they wouldn't have done if they had a human friend who'd have just given them a hug, and actually been there to help them more. But So there is different uses of AI. I mean, we see it all the time on the different platforms, the little bots that pop up and tell you different things and help you, and you know, they start to try to be a bit personalized, and there's definitely something there because people do connect to them. I mean, if you think of video games and you know, people connect to the different characters and everything else, so there is something there. How far you go with it, that it then delves into a whole different. I mean, I'm a bit of a geek. I'm probably the wrong person to ask this question because I'm just like, yay, let's play around with all this different tech, and you know, if it can help us, fantastic. And but yeah, so I think there is definitely a role for it. I think it can definitely help, but it can also help in terms of and there's, I suppose, being a mum, full-time worker, 2 kids, all the rest of it, you know, dog and the lot. And you see people going, oh yeah, AI can help you do this task and the other. And we're always like, yeah, can it help me just do the washing and do all the housework and those type of
Well, that's the
aspects?
robotics
Because that'd be
piece.
really
That's
helpful.
something
That'd be
else.
all tech, yeah. But it's that kind of, if we can help it do the bits of the job that are needed, but not necessarily really adding to our sense of meaning, then great. You know, if we can use technology in those kinds of ways, then fantastic. But at the same time, even like, you know, meaningful work, there is a balance where we could fall into, when work becomes so meaningful, we can give too much of ourselves. We can go over that level, that line. You know, you see it a lot in, for example, the health sector. Certainly
Yeah.
during COVID times, you know, staff were actually making themselves ill.
Yeah.
You know, the amount of burnout now that we have in those kind of sectors because they gave so much of themselves to get through it.
Teachers and healthcare
Yeah,
workers here.
yeah, exactly. So there's that balance, and I think there's that balance with tech and AI. How much it can go. I'm both excited and also a bit scared. Let's see what it does.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very Orwellian and yet intriguing aspect, which is you can, you know, anyone could, for example, you can go into ChatGPT or any of them and say, what am I like? You know, based on all of our communications, you could even upload. And it'll give you insights into your own communication style or what
Yeah.
have you that are sometimes quite insightful.
Mm.
And I wonder whether, you know, take a line manager who's got 30 people and maybe they are like me, kind of half robot. And, you know, I'm always sort of like trying to deduce what's driving someone as opposed to intuiting it. And, you know, you can imagine AI, you know, not the sort of fully autonomous chatbot that's trying to be your friend at work, but rather sort of helping a line manager understand, like, oh, I wouldn't have noticed it, but Sarah's really motivated by her relationships. And, you know, we've got her fully remote right now. Maybe there's a way of promoting, you know, this gets into very sticky, you know, data territory, perhaps. But I do wonder, since we are, you know, it seems like very hard to fight the atomization of workforces. And, you know, everybody's sort of in their, you know, sort of in their digital corner. That there might be some countervailing forces from AI or countervailing capabilities from AI that might actually be of use in remembering the individuality in the
Yeah.
individual.
I mean, definitely. I think, you know, using AI, certainly as a line manager, you know, we talk about relationships with line managers and those connections. And again, during when we sort of moving to remote work, and there was lots of studies around how much time should we be spending and connections. And, you know, this kind of weekly contact of, you know, around 15 to 30 minutes, you know, is what was optimum for engagement, for connection. But if you're a line manager with 30, 40 people, often organizations don't actually give them the time to spend to make those connections and spend the
Mhm.
time actually managing as well as having their own targets. So anything that can help them with that. I mean, I'm terrible with names. If I can see a face and then the next, so for example, what, you know, being on Teams and Zooms and all the different platforms, multiple platforms available that have a face and a name under it, brilliant. Because then I can
Yeah.
see the face, I can see the name, it's in my brain. That's it, it's there. Whereas if I don't have, if somebody says it to me, I find it difficult to hold on to it, and I find it difficult to hold on to that kind of information. Whereas, yeah, if you can use AI to put into, to say, well, I had this conversation with this person, and, remembering little bits of information to help you so that, it's almost like that personal assistant. I always
Yeah.
remember Devil Wears Prada, well-known movie, obviously. But there's always a bit I remember where you've got the Glenn Close character at this function, and there's all these people, and she sort of slightly turns to one of the personal assistants to say, the person's coming towards me now, who is this person? And the personal assistant's job was to remember exactly who that person was in a bit of detail. And that personal assistant at the time, whose Emily Blunt wasn't very well, and she couldn't quite remember it. So the other personal assistant, who Anne Hathaway's character, was her moment to shine because she remembered it. And it's almost like, if you can get AI to do some of that, to kind of remind you, oh yes, and those, for me, that's fantastic. Again, for those individuals, they say, you mentioned about connection. Is it that there's something, that you could use AI to just help you look at it in a different way? Is there something within the organization that we've got that could help with their development, or help me manage this person better, or, do all those things? So I do see that it has a lot of potential. You mentioned again about the issue with data. Obviously, there's questions around ethics and how much information you give to your AI and where it gets stored. And that's the academic,
Sure.
we've got to be careful about all that type of thing. But yeah, I definitely see there's a definite place to help us with some of that mundane sort of
Certainly there.
kind of
Certainly there.
work. Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, we've been talking about other people and their happiness. We'd like to end our podcast asking, what's making you happy?
So yeah, you asked me that one earlier, and I've been reflecting on it. I've mentioned before, I'm a mum, and I have two daughters, and I think it's, for me, what's making me happy is that sense that things are starting to change a little bit. And I mean this from both of my daughters play football. Or in the UK, it's football, in America, it's soccer. It was very much started because my elder daughter was overhearing the boys saying, girls can't play football. Girls can't do this. Girls can't do that. And the teacher sort of saying, well, yeah, I suppose if there's no girls on the football pitch, then yeah, maybe let the boys play. So in a strong kind of, and she was about 8 at the time, I'm not having this. She went onto the pitch. She knew absolutely nothing about football, had no interest in it, never wanted to watch it. All she knew was there's a net, there's a ball, and you're supposed to stop that ball getting in the net. Anyway, that moment sparked joining the school football team, which then resulted in her being signed up for the local grassroots team, which happens to be one of the biggest ones in Europe, as a goalkeeper. There was a lot of satisfaction in that the boys that told her she couldn't play didn't get signed up. And that's just stemmed now. So most of my life seems to stem around football training, whether it's at the side of the football pitch, or the training, so either AstroTurf bits everywhere or muddy football boots, especially because now the youngest being inspired by a big sister about, well, actually, yeah, why not? Girls can do this too. Why can't we do this? So she also plays for the local grassroots team and has actually been signed to, she's got an FA number now. She's been signed to an actual football team, which is fantastic. So, and she plays as a girls team in a boys league. And what makes me happy is a recent football match, standing there, and the girls team thrashed the boys 5-1. The look on the boys' faces of like, but you're a girl, how could you do that? And even overhearing the parents of the opposition team saying, but we thought that would be really easy, it's just a girls' team. And it's that kind of, yes, sense of feeling. So that to me is is what's making me happy.
So that's great. Growth and spite. What more could you
Totally.
have?
Sense of smugness.
Sarah, before you go, tell us what's on your horizon.
Yeah, so like I say the day job is I'm an academic, so just about to start a whole new round of courses with my master's students, and excited to see what they do. And on a research perspective, in collaboration with Engage for Success and the university, we do a national UK engagement survey using a representative sample of the UK working population, where we track changes in engagement levels. We can see differences and variations in employee backgrounds, from long-term health conditions, neurodiversity, ethnicity, LGBTQ+. We can see different things and they're impacting on engagement and on their engagement levels. We're working closely with organisations and government bodies just to try to improve those engagement levels of people who are not having a good time, that are not being treated in the ways that they should be. So yeah, we've just finished data collection and looking to write the report, of which all that stuff's free and readily available to anybody who wants it. It's all about contributing to our knowledge and just trying to make that day job a little bit better. So that's my main focus for the next few months.
That sounds like plenty. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you all for attending. Have a great day. Bye-bye.